provide food, the nonprofits that are working with us to make sure those who rely on the schools for food or have the opportunity to get good nutrition. The folks who've been working on our how do we support 162,000 students with remote learning, and the understanding in our community that Rome wasn't built in a day, and nor will a robust, fully functioning distance learning program be built in a day. But I know that our people are working hard. They're looking at all the possibilities of how we can make good things happen for kids and support continued instruction and learning through this process. And each of them is providing heroic service in some way. So thank you to all of them, and appreciation to our community for their continued support.
Thank you, Mr. Fletcher. Ms. Johnson-Hostler.
Thank you. And I think it bears being redundant today, which I'm one that usually doesn't believe in redundancy, but the appreciation that I'd like to express to our board leadership and every member on the board for all of your support and patience as our district and under leadership of Superintendent Moore and her entire team and everyone who's literally pitched in and been committed to our students, but also our county as a whole. And every decision we make thus far has been inclusive of our entire community. And I think our community has answered that clarion call loud and clear. I text 2 people to get food to children before we got set up, and I think I had over 6 churches immediately respond. And so again, I'm not surprised, but it is still a great reminder that we live in a community where people are responsive and care about one another. And many of us have heard how and have feeling how uncharted and unprecedented this territory is. But I believe as a community, we're navigating it with great strength, and it makes me proud to be a member of this community. And I'll say the thing that I continue to say to everyone is that most of us are used to being able to control things. And so many people are familiar with the Serenity Prayer. And one of the things that one of my colleagues has shared, I think is valuable here, and that's grant me the patience to accept the systems I cannot change today, the courage to strategically enact progress when I know I can, and the wisdom to know that despite structural challenges, I still can make a difference. And I ask that everyone remember that and hold that near and dear, and grant grace and patience to each one of us, and to be kind to ourselves during this time. And again, I've never been so proud to be a member of a community like Wake County. And thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson-Hostler. Mr. Hegarty.
Thank you, Mr. Sutton. Again, we can't say enough. Thank you to all of the community volunteers who have come together, whether individuals or organizations, faith-based groups, just private citizens. It's been really amazing to see everybody rally to address a lot of the challenges that we faced in this time. Also want to make sure that we do thank the staff. I know that in a period where there's a lot of uncertainty and anxiety, especially from parents, there's a lot of demands for instant answers and instant fixes. And it's hard to explain to people in today's internet age that we can't just flip a switch and put all of our classrooms onto Zoom for everyone. And especially with guidance from the state and the national governments constantly evolving and really changing the landscape of what we have to provide in instruction, whether it's remote or however we provide it. I really want to express my appreciation to everyone who's been working late nights and weekends to put together the plan that was released earlier today, and that I believe we'll hear more about in the superintendent's comments. So just a big thank you to them. Finally, to all those who still have questions and are still looking for answers, please know that there are a lot of things that all of us sitting around this virtual table still do not know, because the actual decision makers reside at the federal government or the state government level. We can't tell you right now if the school year will extend beyond June 12th. We have state laws right now about minimum instruction, and we have state laws that tie our hands in terms of our ability to set our own calendar. We won't know the answers to some of these questions until these other leaders come together. In the meantime, we're going to work as hard as we can locally within our power for all of our students and teachers and staff here in Wake County.
Thank you, Mr. Hegarty. Ms. Mahaffey.
Thank you, Mr. Sutton. I, first of all, want to thank everyone in our community for their patience, everyone on staff for their willingness to jump in and help during this time that is unprecedented. In my teacher prep program, there was nothing, not even a paragraph on what to do in a pandemic. And I want to thank our teachers for their patience and their agility and their commitment to our students, wanting to keep those relationships going. I saw many teachers taking to Twitter, administrators reading books on Facebook Live, different Zoom meetings last week, just to connect and keep those relationships alive with our students. This is a change from going from teaching in a classroom to teaching online. And there is certainly a big learning curve for all of us. I think we're seeing that tonight in our virtual meeting. But I know that our teachers are passionate. I know that our staff is committed to the students that we have, and we want to do what is best for them. And again, thank you to everyone in the community who has reached out to help, to our community partners who made it possible for sites to open for students to get food, and 11 additional sites opening this week to expand those options. So just thank you all.
I'm going to come around to the other side of the virtual table, and I'll start with Mrs. Scott.
Thank you, Chair Sutton, and good evening to everyone. I certainly don't have anything new to add, but I do want to share that the work from the community has been amazing. It has truly been moving. There are some remote areas out in Eastern Wake, and I've seen people working very hard to fill in where we have not yet been able to get to. And I certainly appreciate staff for all that they are doing. I mean, the work has been incredible, and just want to keep focusing on that positive as we continue to navigate this. This is something that I don't think anyone could have planned for. As Ms. Mahaffey and Mr. Hegarty mentioned, as everyone has mentioned, this has been really unprecedented, and I really do appreciate everybody's hard work. And I want to continue to ask for a little bit of grace from everyone as we move through this together, because it's that together part that's the most important. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Scott. Dr. Martin.
Thank you, Chair Sutton. I'd like to begin, as the others have, by a huge thank you to staff. You have really stepped up and worked very hard, and we see it and appreciate it. Thank you, too, to the community who has stepped up in all kinds of ways. We will get through this together. As we approach this unique time, I also would like it, encourage us to reflect a little bit and think about the unique opportunity we have to think about education in general. Now is a time, we often get frustrated with, state exams and teaching to tests and so on. I think now is a unique time for us to reflect about what education is about learning versus is it about assessments and credentials? I'm not saying there shouldn't be any kind of assessments, but I think as we look at what we do going forward, I'm continually asking, how can I maximize learning? learning is not just, some list of standards, but it's learning to think, learning to do. So I encourage us to think about learning in a broader context. In that regard, we've had, I've read all the emails that have come in, seen several questions. Optional materials have been posted. Should I have my students do optional work? I think the answer to that, and I say this from my own classroom, is I give lots of optional things for students to do. It helps with learning. It may or may not be part of an assessment, but it helps with learning. So my recommendation is, yeah, do optional things because it assists learning. Similarly, I've seen comments, why are we doing just review? Here I reflect in my own learning, in my own research. I would say that about half of what I do is reviewing literature, reviewing past work, and about half is doing new. And what I discover is the review process itself is a way that I learn a lot of new things. So again, when we hear review, from an educator's point of view, it is not just go over what you've already done, because a lot of new learning takes place out of a review process. Specifically in this time of distancing, I want to, just extend a huge thank you to teachers for what you have done and what you will do. I'm right with you. I've set up my Zoom classroom for my classes at NC State. It's a challenge, but we really can make things happen effectively. Here, I continually reflect for myself is how do I make sure that education is not just dissemination of content and standards. It's a little too easy when we go online to just, talk about slides or, have mechanical videos, but learning really is so much more than just content and standards. And I think our big challenge is how do we continue to build the community of learners? That I would say is the biggest value in an education system. So I think that's a challenge to all of us who are teaching. I also want to extend a huge thank you to students and families. You all are working in new environments as well. There's different formats. Think about this as a great opportunity to learn things that you're interested in, not just what some list of standards says is important or what teachers say is important. Find an old toy, an old radio, an old appliance, take it apart, figure out how it works. You're going to learn so much engineering and science by doing that kind of thing. Take your sketch pad out, learn to sketch bugs and plants. You might become the next Audubon, learning to be a sketch artist. Write stories. We've got the new legislation to teach financial literacy. That's a great time for parents to sit down with children. Learn to put together a budget spreadsheet. I remember I learned a lot about financial literacy, punching numbers to add up numbers on my dad's 1040. There's lots of things that we can do that are real world learning, and I encourage us to really work in that context. In conclusion, I just make the recommendation for what I find helpful in education, particularly as we push to online. I continually ask, am I or my students doing something, or are they just watching something? And the more we can have the learning focus on doing and less watching, the more effective education will be anytime, but particularly during the online time. So thanks to all. Continue to be creative. And this is going to be a unique and wonderful opportunity for learning. Thank you.
Thanks, Dr. Martin. Mrs. Kushner.
Thank you, Chair Sutton, and I'll echo the gratitude that we as a board have for both the superintendent and her leadership team, our families, our students, as well as our community. It has been a trying time, but also a time where I think we can reinforce the importance of the relationship our educators have with their students and the caring that they are showing for our students. So good time for us to remember how social learning is, how interconnected we are, and how learning happens in the context of relationships. So we'll take these relationships virtual for now to stay safe. And with that, we can go on with our meeting. Thank you, Chair.
Well, thank you. And just so you all know, if you're not paying attention, we've got about 24 staff that are spread out around home and the building that are part of the call. But in addition to the 24, board and staff, we have 145 and count growing people that have queued into tonight's meeting. So we have a public and a community that is interested in what we're doing and the decisions that are being made, and want to be updated. And so we thank everybody again for chiming in tonight and listening in. At this point, I'd like to entertain a motion to approve tonight's agenda.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to make a motion to approve tonight's agenda.
Second.
Got a motion by Ms. Mahaffey and a second by Mr. Fletcher to approve tonight's meeting agenda. Hearing no discussion, all those in favor show by sign of aye.
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 Opposed, nay. Ayes have it. Tonight's meeting agenda is approved. Moving to public comment, due to the current COVID-19 pandemic, public comment is being accepted in writing via email. That address has been provided, which was BOE public comment at WCPSS.net. Again, that was BOE for Board of Education, public comment, all one word, at WCPSS.net. All comments will be posted publicly and become part of the Board of Education record. Specific personnel or student matters are not appropriate for the public comment, but may be addressed through applicable WCPSS personnel, the grievance policy, or other applicable policies. The following speakers have submitted public comments. The comments will be posted online along with an archive of at the Board of Education calendar, which again can be found at our website, WCPSS.net. The speakers that participated in this submission were Michael Cox, Sam Whitley, Suzanne Davis, Carrie Bly, Brendan Gipp, Gurjees Abdel, Elizabeth Temple, Kimberly Boyd, Alicia Smith, Claire Lassard, Amy Marshall, Sandy Joyner, Tom Joyner, Rhonda Hennett, Dragana Mendel, and Karen Carter. We have one email with the address EODOOM@AOL, but there is no name that accompanies the comment. But we did receive a public comment from that email address as well. So just wanted to enter that for the record that, again, those speakers submitted public comment and those are available, their comments are available on our website. Now moving to our information item. We have a couple of items for information. We will start with an update on our COVID-19 response. This, I believe, will be a standing information item going forward in the next few meetings as we use this as an opportunity to update the board and community on what our response has been during each interim period. With that, I will turn it over to our superintendent, Kathy Moore, and she and her leadership team will provide the COVID-19 response update.
Good evening. So first, let me just start off by saying that all of the work that you'll hear about this evening is evolving. We are so appreciative of the leadership of the board, the support of the board, the community members who have stepped up to help us with whatever may be before us. You'll hear about some of those efforts and some of those updates as well. We are in constant communication with local elected officials, state officials, Department of Public Instruction, State Board of Education, folks from the governor's office, the North Carolina Superintendent's Association. There are so many groups that are meeting virtually and discussing the questions and the concerns that all districts and school systems are grappling with in order to make sure that during this time, we are taking steps that respect the integrity of the educational process, but also include the humanity of knowing that we are all navigating unprecedented times and uncharted waters. I've used those words quite a bit in the last couple of weeks. The update that you will hear this evening reflects work that has occurred at all levels of the district. We know that in order to achieve continued levels of learning for our students, that we are going to have to rely and depend on our teachers in the classroom. They are our biggest resource that we have in this district. They know their students, they know their content, they know their craft. And so we will be working very closely to make sure that we are providing them from the district level with the tools, the resources, the information, and the guidance that they need. We also know that some of them are way ahead of us in terms of any guidance that we could provide or support, and that they've got some things that they've already been doing and have been doing, and they are comfortable in this space, and we don't want to create any barriers to that either. We are charged with ensuring that we do have plans that address the needs of almost 10,000 of our teacher staff, as well as 162,000 students that we serve. And we are confident that we have the expertise, the background, the passion, and the commitment to do that for our students. This evening, you will hear updates from a number of folks that are on the superintendent's leadership team that are working with various efforts to support our students and our schools and our communities. You will hear first from Anthony Mutillo. Dr. Mutillo is our Assistant Superintendent for Human Resources, and he will provide an update and some language around what we are doing to ensure that we are working with all of our staff during this time to ensure that telework options are available, that staff have opportunities to be paid for work that they're doing, because that is also an important part of taking care of our community as we move forward. You will also hear from Edward McFarland, Chief Academic Advancement Officer. Dr. McFarland and his team, Drew Cook and Karen Hamilton, will provide updates on what's happening in the arena of academics, teaching and learning, and the remote learning plan that we are shifting to. And then you will also hear from Paul Coe, Assistant Superintendent for Student Support Services, who will provide you an update on where we currently are with our efforts to reach students who rely on the meals that we serve every day in our schools as a part of their daily life, so that you can see how we are leveraging their work and support from the community to support students and families in that way. We have other members of the leadership team that are also around in case questions may come up from board members that are specific to those areas. And we will be taking turns at, I guess, this podium, virtual podium, to provide those updates for you. I'm not sure whether it'll be easy to take questions in this format, or if it might be better for board members to, we maybe can pause after each section to see whether or not there are questions related to that particular area. And so I'll just ask each person that comes after me to do that. Once the updates are done from staff, I will return to the virtual podium and just provide some background and information on where we are with things that are still yet to be determined. Areas where we are still seeking some guidance from other officials that can provide some support to the work that we are doing. And of course, take any questions that the board may have at the end of the presentation. So at this time, I will turn it over to Dr. Mutillo.
Good evening, Chair Sutton, members of the board, and all who are joining us virtually. It's hard to believe it's only been 7 school days, but about 8 days ago, our lives changed, especially our working lives, for our school-based employees who went from a very scheduled job with children in the building all day to schools being closed down. And there was a lot of anxiety over that. While the governor assured folks that they would be paid, we also knew that state law required us to provide opportunities for folks to work in order to be paid. So with that anxiety, HR has done a lot of work in trying to assure all of our employees that there are opportunities for them to either work physically or telework. And that has evolved almost daily. The working needs early on were around, cleaning buildings and buses and those kinds of things. And they have evolved to food distribution sites and potentially transporting, food and resources throughout the county. So we continue as a department to work very closely with our teachers and our other school-based staff and central services employees to provide opportunities for our folks to work either physically or through teleworking. It's hard to believe that teleworking didn't exist 7 days ago. And we've been so immersed in trying to find processes for our folks to work, do their jobs at home, but also to take opportunity of this downtime. Teachers in particular don't have a lot of opportunities to participate in professional learning because their jobs are so busy day to day. So we've tried to provide some opportunities for them to just participate in professional learning over these few days, and we'll continue to do so. One of the things that we have coming next is a website dedicated to professional learning for both school-based employees as well as central services employees, where they can continue to grow and develop while continue to get paid as well. So we know this work and the opportunities for work will evolve as the school closures continue, but we are committed to doing everything we can to make sure that our employees remain in paid status so they don't have to worry about that and they can worry about supporting the needs of our students. Also, we are trying to shift from an HR perspective and not just maintaining the day-to-day, but also looking forward. We are generally about to begin our busy hiring season, and obviously we can't have physical job fairs like we usually do. So we're exploring ways to have virtual job fairs and virtual orientations so that we continue to onboard and hire folks, not just for this year, but headed into next year. So those are some of the things that we've been doing to support employees, and will continue to do so as needed and continue to adapt as needed. This will be my pause for questions from the board.
Any questions from this point from board members? I don't see any hands in the gallery, so to speak. So if not, Superintendent Moore, we'll move on to our next speaker.
Good evening, Chair Sutton and members of the board. This is Edward McFarland, the Chief Academic Advancement Officer. I'm here with Drew Cook, the Assistant Superintendent for Academics, and Karen Hamilton, the Assistant Superintendent for Special Education. We sort of have a three-part report tonight, so we would ask that if you wait until all three of us have completed our presentation, we'll be happy to answer any and all questions at the end. Thank you. So our lives did change a week ago. We knew that school was going to be closed, and the initial closure was until March 30th. However, we assumed it would be past that date. And so our goal from the beginning of school closures in the state has been to provide continued learning for our students, and really through two phases of work. Phase one was about the creation and delivery of the remote learning resources site, providing review and practice materials for students. And now we are moving into phase two, the launch of remote continued learning via online student and teacher interaction. Now, certainly we acknowledge and understand the significant differences between remote instruction and the value of face-to-face interactions in the classroom. The remote learning resources site and continued learning via remote access cannot replace classroom instruction. However, we do believe the educational material we have provided through the remote learning resources site will help our students continue to learn and grow while at home until we fully deploy a district-wide remote learning via student and teacher interaction in the upcoming days. And that's really important, teacher and student interaction. Not simply providing a site for a student to log on and complete an activity or to sit and get a video engagement. It is still about interaction, and that's what's important about launching something for a district this size. The Remote Learning Resources site, although just launched on Friday, has had over 60,000 users and over 200,000 views since this past Friday. Because remote learning depends on internet access, we are working diligently to assess the level of internet connectivity of our students, what they have at home, as well as provide consistent information about access to devices and internet. Distance learning is never going to be a substitute for the in-person relationship, which we know is an essential characteristic in the optimal learning environment inside the classroom. In essence, what happens in our classrooms every day cannot be recreated to replicate the learning and personal care that is delivered in our schools by our amazing teachers to every student each day. Online learning can never provide the same kind of environment, speed of progress, and tiered intervention for students exactly as if they were attending a brick and mortar school each day. However, we do have a plan to mitigate learning loss routines, practices, and procedures that will ensure learning will continue with excellence in the 15th largest school district in the United States. I do want to take just a moment to pause and make sure everyone has muted their mics. So a note about special education. Meeting the needs of all students is at the forefront of our conversation with regard to face-to-face as well as distance learning. What we must focus on for our special education population during this unprecedented pandemic is about coherence. We have to support our special education students in a coordinated way. While we always know deadlines, paperwork, and legal standards are important, in a time like this, we want to ensure, focus on, and provide what is appropriate and reasonable in light of circumstances to all students. It is important to remember that students with disabilities are general education students first. The learning opportunities that are provided to all students will be accommodated, supplemented, and modified to the extent possible during this event. According to recent federal guidance from the Department of Education and the Office of Special Education and Rehabilitative Services, the department understands that during this national emergency, schools may not be able to provide all the services in the same manner they are typically provided. And as we develop new learning and establish routines, best practices, and procedures, the manner in which we address special education will evolve accordingly. And Karen Hamilton will speak more to this later in the webinar. So let's talk for just a moment about the long-range academic remote learning plan. We are committed to doing something ambitious with the help and the support of our principals, our teachers, and of course, our local communities. We certainly plan to provide remote learning experiences for our students, quality experiences for our students. We know from what principals and teachers have told us and from parents that many teachers are already providing online instruction and review. Some teachers have the remainder of their year already planned ahead and are ready to engage weekly with their students. Reaching out to 162,000 students by nearly 10,000 teachers is not going to be perfect at first. There may be gaps, and we certainly expect glitches along the way. However, remote learning will include both synchronous, asynchronous, maybe even old-fashioned email back and forth between students and teachers, virtual office hours, and some pencil and paper packets couriered back and forth between homes and schools. We want to do everything we can to ensure that we are reaching all students. Our principals, teachers, and our school communities will play pivotal roles in the remote learning plan. You all know we know that students and that teachers and principals know their students best. Teachers know their individual students' strengths and their needs. Schools are best equipped to locate and connect with each of their students. And we have heard clearly from teachers and principals. They're ready, they are preparing to teach, and most importantly, they want to get started. We want teachers to begin reaching out via Canvas, Google Meet, Google Classroom, again, maybe even just the old-fashioned telephone to connect with students and check on their well-being. Make sure that they have the correct email addresses, assess internet and online accessibility of our students, even send some new learning practice and review material. In essence, we will engage in some prepping and practice with students prior to initiating the new content remote learning rollout. We are transitioning to remote learning, and we know that our leaders and our leadership teams, and most importantly, teachers, know best how to reach their students and meet their needs, and in turn, that is what we need from all of them. Our role then at Central Services will move to fully support schools and their staff with continued learning via remote student and teacher interaction. Schools are going to need additional help such as training, coaching, devices, and logistical support so they are prepared to engage with remote learning. We are excited to briefly share a broad overview of our plan with you this evening, included launch dates. We are eager to return to some sense of normalcy around connecting with our students, both emotionally and online, and continuing with our core mission, teaching and learning. With that being said, I will turn it over to Mr. Drew Cook, who will sort of just outline what will be happening in broad terms over the next few weeks. Drew?
Thank you, Dr. McFarland. Good evening, everyone. Hopefully you can hear me okay. I want to start first by also saying thank you to our district's teachers, principals, school and district staff for their proactive and selfless leadership, both in terms of what they've already done over the past week or so, but maybe more significantly, for all the work that they're going to be doing in the coming days, weeks, and potentially months ahead. As Dr. McFarland indicated, we do feel the same heightened sense of urgency that everyone else does, as it's become increasingly apparent over the last few days that school closures will extend well into the foreseeable future, at least until May 15th, if not beyond. I can assure you that we, in collaboration with the North Carolina Department of Public Instruction, are and will be working around the clock to develop strategies and solutions in order to provide our teachers with the tools, resources, and guidance they need to support students and families moving forward. So within this context, we do recognize and acknowledge that there are and will continue to be many questions for which there may not yet be immediate answers. Some of the questions that we know our students, parents, and teachers have include, but are certainly not limited to, the following. How will grading be conducted? What are the district-wide expectations for instruction? What are the expectations for communication with students and families? What is the balance between district guidelines and school and teacher autonomy? Are we delivering synchronous instruction, asynchronous instruction, or both? When and how will the district distribute printed instructional materials? What are implications for various school calendars? Will adjustments be made to timelines such as end of quarter or end of semester dates? And of course, what digital platforms can and will be used across and within schools to deliver remote learning instruction? And those are just a few. In fact, my 16-year-old high school student asked me many of those several times a day. To be clear, Central Services staff is not and will not be doing this work in isolation. In addition to the ongoing guidance and direction we receive from the North Carolina Department of Public Instruction at the state level, we will continue to develop and expand work streams and organizational structures to leverage the expertise and input of multiple stakeholders, including teachers, administrators, students, and parents, as well as university, community, and local business partners moving forward. So to provide a little more depth and context on our district's remote learning plan in the coming weeks, I'll spend just a few minutes to quickly go over a broad timeline that outlines some plans moving forward, recognizing, of course, that like so many other aspects of our daily lives right now, some of the details are subject to change as circumstances continue to evolve. I think it may have been Mr. Haggerty or another board member or a couple that indicated that this work is not just a matter of flipping a switch, but rather a process. And as such, I think that you'll hear and see that the timeline that we'll share reflects a progressive ramping up of instruction as we move from optional practice and review to a continuing learning approach that can and will include new content. So starting with the current week, if we look at this week and look a few weeks out, starting the week of March 23rd through the 27th, just a few items that I'll note. First of all, students will continue to participate, practice, and review via the Wake County Public School System Remote Learning Resources website. At the high school level, another example, high school students can access the College Board AP site for review resources. That's also available through the Wake County platform. Live review courses actually will begin through College Board tomorrow, March the 25th. We've actually got some specific messaging and guidance on this subject going out to our AP teachers across the district as we speak this evening. Meanwhile, this week, teachers, as Dr. McFarland indicated, will continue to review the remote learning website. As available, they'll pick up laptops if needed from Crossroads on a designated schedule that tech services will be communicating and sharing in the next day or two. Teachers will continue, they will begin, if they haven't already done so, to make contact with students to check on their well-being, assess their access to a device at home, and their ability to connect to the internet. And all of those things are ongoing. And to our teachers' credit, many of them have not necessarily waited for specific guidance. They've gone out and communicated accordingly with their kids and made those initial contacts, and that will continue through the course of this week. Teachers are and will continue to establish meeting and communication structures within their professional learning teams, recognizing that this is work that even if they're separated by geography or distance, is not something that they can do or should do by themselves. And so professional learning teams, even virtual, are going to be important, as will the collaboration with their colleagues across the district. Meanwhile, central services staff this week will continue to develop printed general instruction packets across grade levels for future distribution. Staff will also be designing system-wide structural parameters that answers many of the questions that I alluded to before. This includes things like minimum office hours and student contact opportunities per week, weekly instructional hours and work requirements for students that are age and grade appropriate, grading guidelines, of course, which are going to be critical, and also begin messaging this information to our schools and our community on an ongoing basis. Meanwhile, Special Education Services this week is developing instructional guidelines and materials, and also IEP virtual meeting plans. Looking ahead quickly to the week of March the 30th, next week, students will continue practice and review opportunities. Beginning April the 3rd at the high school level, high school AP students can begin registering for remotely administered AP exams. More information will be available on the College Board and the district website. Students will also next week be able to begin checking out laptops from schools for those that have a need. This will be coordinated by the Wake County Public School System Technology Services Division. Students will also begin to have access next week between the 30th and the 3rd to training on remote learning platforms that will be provided by their teachers and the district. It's important that we recognize it's not just a matter of teacher and staff capacity in delivering instruction, but also capacity building that has to occur for students and families as well on the other end of the line. And then significantly, the second half of next week, beginning April the 1st, assignments will begin to be posted for students and communicated by their teachers. Students will then be able to begin reviewing and referencing materials in preparation for a full remote learning launch, depending on the calendar of the student. And more information obviously will be communicated on what that looks like and what those expectations will be in the coming days. Meanwhile, the week of the 30th through the 3rd, teachers will continue to access and engage in training on remote learning platforms provided by the district. They'll also continue their individual and collaborative planning efforts for remote learning launch. And then again, significantly, the second half of next week, beginning April 1st and really running through the end of the week, April 1st to 3rd, we're asking that teachers begin sending and posting opening assignments, readings, and review and practice materials for students to reference and review in order to prepare for full remote learning launch in the coming week and weeks ahead. Meanwhile, next week, Tech Services will continue to coordinate with schools to facilitate checkout of laptops for those students that have a need. Technology Services will also place a premium, obviously, on focusing on customer service and support to both staff and to families. Meanwhile, other central services staff will begin coordinating delivery and distribution of hard copy general instruction packets, potentially via school buses and food distribution sites around the district. Academics and student special education services staff will also work to finalize and communicate system-wide structural parameters for what remote learning will look like across the district. Then looking ahead to 2 weeks out, the week of the 6th through the 10th, year-round schools, that is their go live date for a full continuous remote learning platform, of course, within district established guidelines and parameters. And so again, that date and target is April the 6th through April the 10th. Traditional calendar schools, that is their spring break, per state guidance, will continue to follow the pre-established calendar. Of course, we recognize that spring break may look quite different this year than many folks had planned given the current circumstances. Meanwhile, the week of the 6th, Technology Services will continue to coordinate with schools to facilitate checkout of laptops and also continue working with the Office of Professional Learning and Academic Advancement to provide remote training opportunities for teachers and school staff, again, to prepare on a rolling basis for delivery of instruction across the district. Also, Central Services staff will continue coordinating delivery and distribution of hard copy general instruction packets. The week of the 6th, staff will also focus on year-round support, given that will be week 1 of their full rollout. Special education services and academic staff will provide ongoing support for continuous learning for students with IEPs. And then finally, that brings us to the week of April the 13th, a little more than 3.5 weeks out. That will be the go live date for the launch of full continuous remote learning for our traditional calendar schools, again, within district established guidelines and parameters. So that's a lot, we recognize, and unfortunately, we don't necessarily have slides for you to view that might help articulate this a little more. And we know that it's often the case, the more information that's provided, the more questions that will be generated, and that's fine. And that said, we are committed to providing rolling updates and messaging on a regular basis as key decisions are made and as structures are finalized moving forward. So with that, at this time, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Karen Hamilton, who will share more about plans for special education services.
Chair Sutton, board members, and Superintendent Moore, thank you for allowing me to join this evening's conversation. I'm moving the work required of special education teachers and administrators forward in a measured manner to provide services and to align with state and federal guidance in light of these unique circumstances. Federal guidance indicates that the Department of Education recognizes that districts will struggle with how to maintain learning for our most challenged students, and also recognizes that districts will put forth their best efforts. I know that you hear daily that this is an unprecedented event, but the implications of the impact of a federal law that never envisioned this sort of closure will reach far beyond May 15th. I'm working in collaboration with academics to provide continuous learning opportunities for students with disabilities in a manner consistent with how the district approaches learning for non-disabled students and in a manner that addresses students' unique learning challenges. Learning for students with disabilities is currently and will continue to keep pace with the resources or learning materials provided to all students. I recognize that this will be far more difficult to provide our students with more severe disabilities and for whom remote learning will be particularly challenging. Within the Wake County Public School System Remote Learning Resource website, we have provided resources for students with disabilities.
Most students with disabilities receive most of their education in general education classrooms. At this time, students who participate in general content should access leveled resources in the remote learning website. Each resource has accessibility features added that will allow students with disabilities to have access to learning activities. Students on extended content standards should utilize the tab labeled Special Education Resources. During this unprecedented event, special education teachers will continue to contact students, work to maintain continuous learning, provide instruction, and foster continued warm relationships. I also recognize that IEP meetings, evaluations, and other compliance deadlines will be a hurdle for us to navigate. I'm anticipating some state flexibility and timelines, but have already begun the process of framing up virtual IEP and transition meetings. District-wide training for teachers will be deployed on Thursday and Friday of this week, and IEP meetings may begin on Monday with a live help desk to provide immediate solutions during virtual meetings. Based on the success of the IEP meetings, we'll then continue to move forward other types of meetings in a virtual environment. It's come to our attention that principals, teachers, and perhaps board members are receiving communications regarding the current status of special education or the provision of services during the closure of school. Please feel free to forward those communications to me. Again, thank you for allowing me to join you and discuss the direction of special education during this unprecedented event.
Thank you, Karen and Drew. And now we will take questions from the board.
Thank you, Superintendent Moore and staff. I see several hands. I'll start with Dr. Martin.
Thank you, and thank you all for that presentation. I have two questions. One is particularly during synchronous activities and group activities. I'm just curious, what are the plans in place for addressing privacy? I know that's something that I struggle with even in my own class at NC State. Well, things like WebEx or Zoom, you can block recording. That doesn't block somebody from, capturing video in other ways. So I'm just curious what thought has been given. Can you reflect at all on privacy of information?
Dr. Martin, this is Marla Gaddis. I'm jumping in on this question for them. So as we move through this process, as you can imagine, we're looking at a variety of issues around data privacy for students. And so we have some guidelines that we're developing right now on best practices. We've already given some of those to teachers, more coming out as we go through the process. We are also looking at and knowing that we may not have the right platform in every place. And so looking to make sure that the platforms that we're using, not only at the district level, but at the individual teacher level, that all of those data privacy needs are being met. It's one of the reasons why, unfortunately, we don't have a free-for-all of resources that we are allowing everyone to use at this point in time. We still want best practices and clear heads to prevail when it comes to when we use digital resources, that our privacy, our data privacy is being met. So along with everything else, we're providing more and more training related to those types of issues.
I'll also add, Dr. Martin, that we know that in many classes, teachers already do some type of remote learning with their students, some through Canvas, Google Meet, Google Classroom, maybe Facebook Live, and we're trying, because this is such an unprecedented time, we don't want to say that it only has to be done one way and the whole district has to relearn when there are established guidelines out there, established procedures that teachers have with their students and that students understand with their teachers. And so we're trying to make sure that we can honor some of the work that's already happening, but also ensure that we are using platforms and the best to our ability to protect students' privacy with the use of appropriate guidelines, processes, and procedures.
Okay, Ms. Kushner, Dr. Martins, did that answer your questions?
I'm sorry. Thank you. That provided very important information. I think it's just really critical that we keep that front and center, particularly in required assignments, because just like for any photography, for example, we have to get permission to use images. Not everybody's going to be comfortable with it. So I think that answer helps in our consideration, but I think I'd like both us and the public to recognize that we can't just use anything, and B, we can't require just anything, because there really are lots of different issues here that need to be taken into consideration. So thank you. I've got the second question. Do you want me to ask that now, or you want to do some round robin?
Well, go ahead while you have the floor.
Okay, my second question is, I didn't hear, and I know it's even more complex, what are plans in place to address things like, several of our CTE classes, music classes, say like learning piano, where specific equipment is needed. Do we have any ideas of how we plan to move forward with those kind of classes? That obviously is not, the place to start, but because it's so complex. But I'd just be interested in hearing, what are some plans to address those more complex, specific equipment class environments?
Well, as I said earlier in my comments, this is not like obviously traditional classroom instruction. So we're going to have to think about instruction differently, and it will not be the same. And in some cases, it will not be equal to. It is difficult to hold, for instance, a band class with students in various places across the district. However, there is a lot of theory, history, those kinds of concepts that can be covered within the class. There are also, digital support out there where you can work with musical notation and writing music, etc. I will say that our full staff is on this, and so there are about 80 folks from academic advancement working on this, including our arts people. So they are at the table, and you may see that when we did our remote learning resources, we made sure to include electives and the arts, but CTE, the arts, they are all at the table in working through this comprehensive work.
Okay, thank you. And it will need to evolve. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Martin. Ms. Kushner.
Thank you, Chair Sutton. And I want to thank you for the presentations from the three of you and Superintendent Moore. And I appreciate the year-round schools yet again being on the forefront of rolling out new curriculum and methods for the school district. So I think that I need to underscore that appreciation to our year-round principals and staff. And I also, if we can get more details communicated to families as soon as we can about the sort of customer service that we're going to be providing for the technology. This is going to be a new way for all of us to engage in education. So I appreciate that was a big part of what y'all have been thinking about, but as much as we can get more details on that, how that's going to be operationalized would be appreciated. Because so many of our families we're hearing from are struggling with this closure, maintaining, some semblance of normalcy at home, making sure folks are staying safe and having their well-being checked on, but also we need to get on with instruction. So I appreciate the detail that was presented tonight.
Thank you.
Ms. Mahaffey.
Thank you. A lot of information coming in. I know this is not the answers to all the questions that we've been hearing from parents and community members, but certainly a start. Ms. Hamilton, my question was specifically regarding IEPs, knowing what that process looks like and how many people need to be in a room for those. Does your team have an idea on what that's going to look like? Is there a need for IEP teams to meet to look at compensatory services during this time, or where are we in that process?
There's a couple of elements to your question, so I'm going to take it down to a couple. So with regard to virtual IEP meetings, we are training school level teams on Thursday and Friday of this week how to meet through Google Meet so that we can include parents in virtual meetings when they have access to the ability to participate virtually. We're also training on how to conduct IEP meetings through the phone. Those two elements were allowable under federal law prior to this event. They just have not been used to the extent that we're getting ready to use them. We are training on IEPs, and depending on the level of support that schools and school level teams need, during that time, we'll make a decision about whether we move to conduct meetings where schools have already gathered evaluation information for initial evaluations and reevaluations. We just can't gauge how much support schools are going to need until we roll it out. With regard to extended school year or compensatory services, those two elements are based on either a failure on the part of a child to recoup learning during an absence, or we have failed to provide services. At this time, we don't have data to support either. In our current situation, students with disabilities are receiving the kinds of learning opportunities that their counterparts in general education are. So there's not failure to provide FAPE. So at this point, there are no compensatory services to be considered. That doesn't mean that in the future, that won't be a necessity. But at this time, we wouldn't have enough data to consider extended school year, and we don't have enough information to know what compensatory services might be like. The federal government has provided us guidance on how to begin thinking about that. But quite honestly, this is an unprecedented event, and we can't predict what that might look.
Thank you very much for clarifying, especially in that last part. My next question, Mr. Sutton, was in regards to students and counseling. I don't know if that's something that Mr. Coe will be talking about if he's speaking tonight.
Well, I will say that on our learning resources site, we do provide a social emotional learning area for parents and students around COVID-19. And part of our plan through the remote learning is to have office hours where we do in fact expect folks like counselors and those that are traditionally in schools will hold office hours and will be able to communicate with students, you know, either in small groups or potentially one-on-one as needed. But certainly we expect to continue that as best we can under the circumstances.
Okay, thank you. And I had one more question for Ms. Gaddis. For our families that are new to these platforms, I imagine your team will have a large lift on explaining certain, whether it's Google video chat services or folks who maybe are new to any other digital learning resources. What kind of supports are available for parents that are struggling in accessing these?
Ms. Maffey, I appreciate that question. So early, I'll just mention that on the remote learning site, there is a technology support page that we've just begun to scratch the surface with some of the resources that will be available. So more and more resources will be built out there for parents and for students. We're also trying to put as much of that in Spanish as well for our Spanish speaking population, and working with our translation office as well to make those available in different languages. On top of that, we are in the process of standing up an online help request as well as a call-in line to where parents could call and get support right from their home in the moment as well. So those are two pieces. One of the things that we wanted to make sure is it's not okay to just give out devices and provide remote learning and then not have some sort of tech support for our families at home during that time. So both will be operational next week, that will begin to do that, and we'll be continuously adding resources to the site on how-tos and best practices.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Mahaffey. Ms. Cash.
Thank you very much. I think I had a couple logistics questions. That's kind of what I always look at. For like I heard a couple times that students would be picking up laptops, or we would be distributing laptops. Will they get that information through their own schools, or will that come through the website?
Ms. Cash, this is Marla Gaddis again. We have a collaborative team with Academic Advancement, our area superintendent, our Office of Equity Affairs, and the communications, and a variety of other folks that are working together on a plan to help our schools be able to check out devices that we have within our schools. I do want to clarify too that if you have devices at home, any type of device will work. I think there was some confusion with some of the tweets that were going out earlier that an iPad or a phone wouldn't work, and of course they will. But what we're working with our schools on is determining need. So folks who don't have any access to either a device or internet, as well as families who may have 3 children and only have 1 device. So we're looking at it from multiple perspectives, and we'll be reaching out to parents in different ways to offer assistance. And then we'll not only have the schools will be checking those out at the schools, but we at some point in time as we go through this process will also look at adding laptops to buses that might be distributing food or other academic packets.
So schools will actually be helping you kind of see the needs of their own communities?
Yes, ma'am, because they know their communities the best. Yeah. And we certainly want to allow them to serve the community. We are just trying to put some guidelines around how this happens and try to do the best we can to make sure that our parents are not getting really old devices that really don't work. We want to make sure that our students have a good experience with remote learning at home.
Okay, thank you. And I had one other question here as far as, well, I had 2 actually. One, I see where we got a lot of teacher access. Teachers will be accessing devices. They will be talking to their students on a regular basis. And I'm glad about that because that's a real security for students. What kind of access will parents or students have to principals in our schools?
Well, again, I think in this kind of environment, sort of the lines of communication that were there, previously, either reaching out through email, through phone calls, it will still be one of the best ways to reach a principal.
Okay. One last question, scholarship deadlines that some parents have asked about. I think it's been moved out to like June maybe or something. Is there, the counselors will probably have more information on that as it goes forward, that students shouldn't be so worried about, or should they be worried about scholarship deadlines?
Well, what I can say is the Student Support Service team, counselors have been looking at, what changes will need to take place with registration and registration deadlines just within our district, and also what that means to, deadlines with universities. I will say, though, that we are reaching out to universities because it's important that they also have a part in this. They certainly know what's going on. They've closed classes, they've sent students home, and they understand the level of crisis that we are in with regard to teaching students at this point. So we have reached out to partner with them with questions around, scholarships, grading, those kinds of things.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Cash. Ms. Johnson-Hostler.
Thank you, Mr. Sutton. I think my question was answered by Marlo, but regarding were we going to have instructions and information in languages other than English for our families. I know Dr. Rangel has started to post some things in Spanish, but I guess the follow-up to that is, have we started to work with our ESL teachers as well on the platform? Will they also have access to our students over the platform as well, since we are going to start putting out information in Spanish?
So I would say that they are part of the team. Our folks who handle our English language learners, that team is working with Dr. McFarland's team as well as working with us. We are actually on the district site for right now. We've been working with translation and interpretation services to get those translated. But as we go forward, I would imagine that we will do a lot of work with our English language learner teams.
I'd also say, Ms. Johnson-Hostler, that we are really working diligently to make sure that everything we are doing, we are translating into Spanish. And so each communication, what we're posting up on our platform, our website is always translated. That is our goal. And it may take some time. It may not happen simultaneously every single time, but we are really working to make sure that that is kind of the gold standard.
So a follow-up to that, which you may know, Dr. McFarland, with a couple of the community feedings I did last week, that was the question I had. Do we know if this information that went, which I'm sure it probably did because that's the best habit, but I haven't seen it myself, that the information that's going out to parents that went out today about remote learning has already been translated? Because I was working with a organization and I can send it to them to share with their communities as well if we've already posted it.
It was already translated and went out simultaneously.
Perfect. Thank you, Dr. McFarland.
Okay, I don't see any additional hands. Ms. Kushner, you have another question?
Yes, thank you, Chair Cushing. Thank you, Chair Sutton. I did have one final question, just to clarify that this meeting is going to be available. Will the recording be available as well as the public comments and all of the detail, the excellent timeline that Mr. Cook went through? Just wondering how we're going to share the information that has been presented tonight.
Public comment is now posted online at the same location where today's virtual meeting link was found. So participants can see those public comments posted now. The meeting is also being recorded, and I believe that recording will also be found at that link. Mr. Simmons, could you confirm that in terms of where that recording will be found later?
Yeah, this is Tim. The archive of this meeting will be found at the same link where people found the hyperlink to get to the meeting itself. That's also, Chair Sutton, as you just indicated, where the public comments are found. And we'll also look into our ability to post audio only to YouTube. You know, that's where the public typically looks for archive board meetings.
Okay, Ms. Kushner, does that answer your question?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Okay. Ms. Scott, you have a question.
Thank you. I was also curious about, I think Ms. Kushner was asking would there be a written, will people be able to read the comments when this is uploaded into YouTube? Will it have the closed captioning available?
It's,
I'm not.
Ms. Scott, I'm looking at our folks, but I believe because it's just audio, there will be no closed captioning. There will not be video with this.
Okay, I don't know if there's a way. I know some of the statements that were read by staff were already prepared, so I don't know if there's a way to share that for people who might be hearing impaired, so that they would be able to access the information. There was so much good information shared. I would definitely hope that they'd be able to. Could be some way to make that accessible for everyone.
Yeah, all of the resources, including statements, will be uploaded for public review.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
But I'll also add, as we develop, like the timeline and some of the information we've shared tonight, we will be adding that to our remote learning resources site, and we will also be continuously working to configure that to meet the needs, such as what students are expected to do, what teachers are expected to do, so that it mirrors sort of step by step the work that we're doing as we progress through this fully remote learning. I can't say enough that this is a big undertaking and we want to do it right. We simply don't want students to be logged on, sitting in front of a computer, sort of sit and play. Instruction by its very nature is interactive, and we want to strive to make sure our online instruction is interactive and not simply sit and read, answer a worksheet, and sending assignments back and forth.
Mr. Haggerty.
Thank you, Mr. Sutton. I just wanted a little more information. I think Dr. McFarland and Mr. Cook had done a good job of talking about this, but I needed just a little more perspective, I guess. When we look at the students that don't have online access and the work that will need to be done in the coming days to identify all of them and then secure the delivery system of getting them the workbooks and then also collecting work, how big an undertaking is that going to be? And can you just describe it in a little more detail?
Well, I'll talk broadly, and then maybe Marlo will jump in with some of it around technology, but it is a significant undertaking. And we know that there are households that does not have internet. And we know that, through Spectrum, they can access internet free, but that doesn't mean it's going to be hooked up overnight. And it may take a few weeks, but then once you have internet, you still then require a device. And we know that some folks already have connectivity and devices. We're going to be working diligently through our schools to name students that don't have devices and don't have connectivity, and do everything we can within our power to make sure that that happens as quickly as possible. But we certainly can't put a timeline that it will happen by a certain date, just because of all the different circumstances.
I think the only thing I would add to that is just that it's not just about providing a device and internet, and we certainly are trying not to rely on families to take the Spectrum deal that we put up there. We're also looking at securing hotspots for our families who need them as well. And so some of that work, when every district in the country is trying to get the same inventory at the same time, can be a little bit more difficult. So our goal is to get everybody what they need in the quickest amount of time as possible. I know that's not a perfect answer to your question, Mr. Haggerty, but at this point in time, that's kind of where we are at the moment.
So if I might, and Ms. Gaddis, it might not have been that the answer was imperfect. It might have been that my question was imperfect. What I was really looking for was the other side of that equation, not the technology side. For the students that will require us to reach out to them with a non-internet based solution. Do we have any idea about the extent of that process and what that would entail? I mean, I imagine it's going to be a big undertaking, but I just didn't know how big.
Yeah, thank you for clarifying, Mr. Haggerty. Yeah, it is a big undertaking. We know, part of our goal this week is the general education packets, which are, more general in nature. But we know also to continue learning, we have to look at what that looks like at K2. And K2, certainly, any online learning would look very different at K to pre-K to than it would at high school. And so there certainly would be less on time. We will rely on our remote learning site to provide some support, but there will also have to be more of what I was talking about, some of the couriering activities back and forth. And that's where we really think that we can use our schools and our bus fleet to do some of that work. It's not perfect. We have some great ideas around how to do that. But it's just going to, take some time to flesh it out.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Mr. Sutton.
It looks like that completes all of our questions.
Thank you, Brett. I appreciate your time. Our next speaker is Mr. Paul Coe. He's the Assistant Superintendent for Student Support Services, and he's going to just give you an update on food security and the work, the outstanding work that they have been doing, providing food sites for our district.
Good evening, Chair Sutton, Superintendent Moore, and board members, and Wake County out there. My name is Paul Coe, Assistant Superintendent Student Support Services. I just wanted to give a quick update of where we're at with the food security and access. And before I do, I wanted to make sure that we're calling out the amazing work of our Child Nutrition Services team, who've been working tirelessly to make sure that our students are getting fed, our families have access to food. And that's been in partnership with our partners at Wake County, the Cooperative Extension, the Interfaith Food Shuttle, and the Food Bank of Central and Eastern North Carolina, who've also done so much work to ensure that we're able to provide food access and security for our families. To share with you a little bit about our current context, from when we started food distribution last Tuesday through today, we've served about 52,000 meals so far. And then the average daily count of both breakfast and lunches served is about 8,650 per day. We've set up a process to deliver to our students who are experiencing homelessness, our McKinney Bento students. And we've also been delivering Friday food boxes to strategic sites each Friday, so that based on the daily count demand rate, trying to rotate through sites, keeping in mind the geographic balance needed, so that at specific sites, Friday food boxes are available to families to take the weekend as well. And yesterday we opened 11 additional school sites, and through today's meal total was around 14,000 meals served. And so in addition to that, we're planning to open 2 sites in Rollsville on Wednesday. And we are currently on daily calls that involves the school folks, the Wake County partnership folks, the cooperative extension folks, and along with our food banks. So that's our current context. And future considerations, one of the things that we're looking into is figuring out how can we collaborate with transportation to use our buses to route food to additional food and secure locations. we're meeting daily to assess where our needs are and figure out the best way to meet them. So on a daily basis, we're trying to figure out what sites do we need to add, what community partnerships do we need to establish. Something to keep in mind for future is I think there's materials and product needs that may come, given that our closure is going to last at least until through May 15th. Around gloves, meal bags, food container supplies, those are potential worries for us as there's a potential nationwide shortage because both school systems and restaurants have moved to takeout. So there's a competition for these materials. And then I think maintaining both food and packaging supply inventory for our child nutrition services team is going to be really important. And one of the things we've already done to try to get ready for that is we've applied for a grant to offset cost of meals to add additional sites as we move through this process. I'll now pause for questions.
Ms. Mahaffey.
Thank you, Mr. Coe. My question was in regards to a little bit of what Dr. Batillo referenced earlier. First of all, I think it's amazing that this all came together to serve these students and find those gaps and fill those gaps as we see them. For our CNS workers, we know that they are an enterprise fund. For them working in this capacity, does this allow them to continue to receive paychecks through the duration of the COVID closing of schools?
Yes. So as all the CNS workers that are at work, they're going to be paid for the work that they're doing, and we're trying to do all we can to make sure that that group of staff are employed as much as possible.
Great. And I know there was a form that went out and a lot of people have signed up to volunteer. Where are we with that volunteer list? Are we starting to see more folks from the community? And I appreciated the donation page as well for those who either can't or don't feel comfortable leaving their homes to participate, that they could offer a monetary donation to help.
Yeah, so first of all, we really appreciate the public outreach to volunteer, and that comes from both school system folks and the general public. And folks that are Wake County, folks at Wake County, the governmental entity, and also the cooperative extension have actually been coordinating our volunteers. And our priorities that we've tasked them towards was first the delivery of meals to our students experiencing homelessness, our McKinney-Vento population, and also around these Friday boxes. But as this process evolves, we're going to need probably more folks to support other parts of food access and security. So we just preach patience for the folks who've signed up and ask them to just hang on until we reach out to them. But don't take it personally if we haven't reached out yet.
All right, Ms. Mahaffey, does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Okay. Ms. Scott.
Thank you. Mr. Coe, I just wanted to say such a huge thank you to you. I know you have been working on this with a team of people around the clock for quite some time, and it continues to evolve and change, and we continue to take care of more and more families. And I really wanted to extend a personal thank you for that. And of course, answering all of our emails in between that. But of course, the passion remains from so many people to take care of our children, our students, and particularly our most vulnerable communities. I actually I had my questions written down. Ms. Mahaffey actually asked about both of those with the volunteers. And you mentioned the McKinney-Vento students. I did also want to say a thank you to many family-owned and locally owned restaurants that have been offering and just willing to help right away, immediately. And of course, we have to be careful how we navigate all of this, but I did just want to extend a thank you to them as well. And with volunteers, is there any specific information you'd like us to relay to them when they are saying, I haven't heard anything yet? Any kind of time frame just to provide for these people?
I think each day it's evolving, but right now we're trying to make sure to prioritize staffing our food distribution sites along with the community sites, for example, the ones in the Western region that some of our community partners are setting up for us while picking up meals from us. So we're prioritizing that and our students who are McKinney-Vento. We're prioritizing our students who are experiencing homelessness, and then also making sure that the Friday food box delivery, so that families are not food insecure into the weekend. Those have been our main 3 priorities, along with the day-to-day operations. But as we think about more needs that come up each day, I think we get new data and new input from our community about where pockets of food insecurity exist. So as that turns up, we'll keep responding. And so I think, I can't give you an exact time, but just know that we're working through both the volunteer group that's been so gracious with their time to make sure that if we have a need, we're able to reach out and get that support.
Thank you, Mr. Coe. And do you know if any of the partners we've been working with have a different way? Is there a need or a way that our families can check for needs within those partners for the Interfaith Food Shuttle to find specific ways they can help directly through those resources?
Yeah, I think the best way right now is that because, we don't know how the food product and supply chain will be, in the coming months, donating to our food banks, both at Interfaith Food Shuttle and the Food Bank of Central and Eastern North Carolina, would be the best way to directly support our efforts, or through, we've set up a donation site as well. That's on our wcpss.net/food link. And so if folks want to donate so that in case we need additional funds to serve more areas, those are the ways I would say that they could help immediately.
Thank you. Those were all of my questions. Thank you, Mr. Coe.
Ms. Scott, Ms. Cash.
Yes, thank you. I just wanted, Paul Coe, you know that I've been watching you we've been looking at this fairly closely, and I know that what you and Child Nutrition Services and Paula DeLuca have done is nothing short than a miracle for what you have accomplished. So I thank you for that, because it's amazing to me. I have told volunteers that, I think that we need to let volunteers know, or we as board members need to let volunteers know that this is very long. This is going to be a very long span of time. So if we don't use at the very beginning, there's plenty of opportunity for us to use volunteers for in the future, because it's going to go on for quite a while. And I had one question about like supporting food, or especially the Friday food boxes. Transportation of those, is that a need at all, or is that only being done through our bus drivers and buses?
So right now that's been done through, last Friday it was done through volunteers that have been gracious with their time. So essentially folks have been, like, the food bank has been dropping off at specific sites, but then this group of volunteers will drive the pallets of boxes to additional sites to make sure that they get the boxes. And then the other volunteer group that's picking up from Interfaith Food Shuttle, they will go to the Interfaith Food Shuttle facility, pick up the boxes, and take them to the specific school sites where distribution is happening. But with the Friday food boxes, there is not an unlimited supply. So we're working with a fixed amount each week that our partners can actually provide. We're trying to just stay in communication with both food banks about what their capacity is, and then trying to distribute according to the data that we see around meal demand.
That's great. Thank you. So food is still needed at like Interfaith Food Shuttle, right? At some points we've heard they're full and they got so much, but at some points we still need to be saying food goes there, right?
Yeah, to both of the food banks, I would say.
Okay. And then just, I guess that as you find other needs, board members, are asked, like, regularly on a daily basis a million times. What can we do to help? You'll let us know what needs come up to the board members that other than food as they come up, so that we'll have an answer that can possibly, we can get some things. That
Yes, I think if you all hear anything, you could just reach out to me and I could work with our group to see how we can meet those needs.
okay, thank you, Paul. I think there's more than one of you, but thank you.
Okay, that concludes our questions for that speaker. Does that conclude this topic as well, or are there additional?
There are a few additional pieces. Yeah, there are a few additional pieces that I wanted to share in closing.
Okay.
I mentioned at the onset that there have been a number of opportunities through different groups. There's the North Carolina Superintendent's Group. I also serve as a member of a large district consortium of superintendents for the 12 largest districts in the state of North Carolina. And then just some other opportunities to engage with officials at different levels. State Board of Education, Department of Public Instruction, the Governor's Office, Department of Health and Human Services, just opportunities to have conversations with folks about our needs in different areas. And as a part of that work, there's been some requests, guidance, suggestions, needs developed, and I want to talk about those just a little bit in terms of things that are still before us that we are seeking some guidance or support or flexibility on. So one of the areas that we are looking to the state for is to provide some uniform guidance to all districts around the work that's happening with staff work days, leave time, other types of personnel issues that apply to all categories of personnel in schools. Initial messaging was very specific about teachers and students, but we have lots of other categories of personnel that work in school districts that we need some uniform guidance and support on. A second area that we are looking for additional communication and action on has to do with suspending testing requirements and the related accountability measures that go with them. You may be aware that the North Carolina Department of Public Instruction did submit a federal waiver request earlier this week for the ESSA, Every Student Succeeds Act accountability guidance that are part of our federal accountability model. There are also some state accountability measures that we are going to seek some flexibility on, and that requires legislative action. As you know, the legislature is currently not in session. So there have been conversations that have been going on around what that will look like and when we will get some action in those areas. Another area that we are looking for some flexibility in and guidance is some relief funding. We know that the new landscape that we are facing is going to come with some additional costs to districts. And you may be aware that earlier today, the governor did direct $50 million worth of funding directly to school efforts to deal with the impact of COVID-19. That $50 million will be working through the Department of Public Instruction and the State Board of Education in terms of management and disbursement to school districts. So we are going to be looking in the next few days at ways that we might be able to access and what those parameters will be. And some of the examples of things that come as unanticipated costs would be the costs that we're currently incurring around our feeding sites. There may be costs that are not reimbursable there. We also need to look at expanding that perhaps in different ways to meet the communities and those individuals who are not able to access the current sites that we have established. There'll be additional costs there. The looking at how we are looking to provide devices for students or other things that will help them in resources with regards to the remote learning plan. There may be costs associated there. So all of those are things that we're going to be looking for in terms of where is the funding for these things that come from. We are also in another area seeking direction on greater flexibility with regards to policy or waivers to policy. And there's a whole host of things here that we're having to look at. For example, calendar, that's one that comes up pretty frequently. That will require legislative action. The days and hours of instruction are part of a calendar law that defines the school year. Right now, we know that the governor has ordered that schools be closed for students through May 15th. And there are questions about, earlier on, I think someone asked about extending the school year. That's something that I'm sure that is being discussed. But there are a lot of logistics that go along with that, should that be the case. And we would need the details and a lot of flexibility in the state calendar law in order to even implement something like that. There have been questions about policies around grading. Are there flexibilities that we need to have in order to ensure that our grading mechanisms as we move through remote learning are actually reflecting progress and the changes that are before us, and how we can focus on student learning, perhaps even more than the grade at this point. Sort of tied to grading, another conversation that has been occurring that I want to acknowledge sort of in a broader sense is the impact on our senior class, the class of 2020, who have been accepted to college or university, who are still applying or waitlisted, and what the impact of what's happening with COVID-19, remote learning, and schools being closed is going to have there. I've spoken to some folks in the UNC system about that. Superintendents have spoken to the governor's office about some uniform guidance and messaging there, at least for the UNC system, that we believe other universities will follow. And this is not just a North Carolina issue, it is a national issue. There are deadlines associated and policy associated with when we have to spend our funds by. And so we are going to seek relief and waivers there so that we can have more flexibility with the funds that we have available to us, because some of those deadlines come pretty early in the school year. Those are just some examples of the kinds of things that are still before us that we need additional guidance or action on. And if board members have any specific questions about anything that I just mentioned or brought up, I'm happy to answer that before I close.
Ms. Kushner.
Thank you, Chair Sutton, and thank you for that summary, Superintendent Moore. You earlier sent that school's district recommendations for continuing 2019-2020 school year, which it seemed like had a lot of this information. Can you somehow make that public so that we can get our families and our community to start advocating with other elected officials along some of these needs that you so clearly outlined, some of the waivers, some of the other things that we need to happen for our students and educators? It would be great if we had this document readily available.
Okay, I'll look and make sure that that's ready for prime time. It came from a compendium of sources, but I do think it's all been put together now, so it should be available.
Yeah, as soon as we can get that in, so families can help us advocate. I think we need the help. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Kushner. Mr. Fletcher.
Mr. Sutton and Superintendent Moore, I just want to reflect on the complexity of this, of creating a virtual school district in 3 weeks, and the myriad of challenges and questions that our staff and leadership are having to deal with in order to be able to put forward a system that will work, that our teachers can access and use joyfully, that our students will find to be engaging and instructive, and that will promote learning. All of the minutia behind the scenes, the calendar law, the seat hours that are required in the statute, all of those things our public doesn't really see. And I want to commend our staff for sharing some of what the challenges are with us and with our community, and express appreciation for the hard work that's going on and the recognition that finding solutions to these challenges. The calendar law could put everybody out of school on June 10 unless the legislature chooses to amend it in some way. So it's real. Those are real issues with short timelines and things that the school board has no control over. I appreciate the leadership of the superintendent and staff in raising these issues and saying, we're gonna put together a strong instructional program for our students in spite of these unanswered questions. And we're moving forward with haste, but also with planning that makes sure that our implementation is as problem-free as it can be when we're addressing the needs of 162,000 students. So I just want to say thank you, and again, encourage our community to continue to support the effort as this system rolls out.
Thank you, Mr. Fletcher. Ms. Mahaffey.
Thank you, Mr. Sutton. Superintendent Moore, I want to thank you for going down that long list of things that we are still working on, and that it is an effort and a lift, not just from folks within our school system, but around our state as well. I wanted to go back specifically to when you talked about the calendar law and the flexibility needed. I'm hearing a lot of concerns, especially from year-round parents, where they don't have an opportunity to necessarily extend into the summer as a traditional calendar school would do. I know year-round in this form is something that's unique to Wake County. How are we making sure that those voices are also heard at the state level?
So the state is aware. I believe that our multi-track year-round students alone are the 15th or 16th largest district in North Carolina. Just those students that we serve in a multi-track year-round school. It's a large population. They are also aware that the multi-track year-round calendar cannot extend the way other calendars extend, because they already, 3 of those tracks already go through the last week of June. What we do have is some flexibility in the next 6 weeks before us around the track out periods that are currently assigned. If there would be a need to recapture that, because some of those days are already designated as teacher work days and that sort of thing. So we are looking at our current calendars to see what is possible. Not even if there is a change to the calendar law, our multi-track year-round schools are going to be at a disadvantage unless we go ahead and look at, for example, track out periods that are happening in the next 6 weeks. And there is some advantage to that because none of them are in school buildings. So the crowding issue that might occur if you tried to put all 4 tracks in at the same time is not a factor. And every time I look at the calendars, it just kind of, it just becomes overwhelming to see number of choices that we have for our families, because we also have to look at modified calendar schools, all of our early college, high schools that are partnered with college universities or Wake Tech, and making sure that the decisions that we're making, we're taking into account all of those calendars as well. There's still a lot of work before us.
Thank you. And one of the other questions that I think a lot of us have been seeing, especially when it comes to the online learning component, is why can't we simply hop on to North Carolina Virtual Public School? I'm sure you've heard this question as well.
Yeah, so North Carolina Virtual Public School has some capacity. They do not have the capacity to serve 162,000 students pre-K-12. We know that we want to make sure that when we start engaging in something like North Carolina Virtual, we're actually going to have to look at, we're not going to get unlimited seats. So we're going to have to look for priorities. What would be the best use of additional seats on North Carolina Virtual Public? And it would have to be a transfer situation where a student was already enrolled in a course and would transfer into the NCVPS course. And when I think about priorities, I think about our seniors. I think about students who need to get through on time, that need to move on to the bright futures that they have before them. So we are looking into the availability of NCVPS. It is not a complete solution. Districts are limited in the number of slots that they are able to have. And while NCVPS is looking to expand some of those slots, it is insufficient to deal with the needs of Wake counties or across the state as a catch-all.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Mahaffey. Mr. Hagerty.
Thank you, Mr. Sutton. Superintendent Moore, I know that we've put out a lot of communication about this, but I still get questions from people in the community who are just a little bit unsure about exactly what we'll be doing with spring break. I know that we had moved ahead in closing schools and had assumed we would use those spring break days for the closure, but then we were told under the calendar law that we couldn't change spring break on the traditional calendar. If we still have spring break, what does that mean for students and parents in our traditional calendar schools?
So we did not modify the calendar. When we first made the decision that Wake County Public School Systems would be closing schools for students, it was actually the same day, but prior to the governor making his announcement. Our decision was predicated upon moving around existing days like spring break, in particular for traditional calendar. When the governor issued his executive order that Saturday evening, his executive order had there were immediate questions that came along with it. And the following Tuesday evening, after the executive order on Saturday was issued, we received clarification from DPI that the 2-week closure were to be considered teacher work days. That's not what spring break is. We had not made changes to our calendar, and so we were waiting on official changes to our calendar. We'd messaged what our options were, but we were waiting on official changes to our calendar until we understood better what the governor's executive order meant. So at this point in time, our spring break is for traditional calendar schools is still scheduled for the week of April 6th. We also recognize and acknowledge that lots of families' travel plans have probably changed. And so we anticipate that as our teachers are reaching out to their students to determine how they are and set up the remote learning process with their individual classes, that we may have some in and out during that week of both teachers and students. But we don't know exactly what that's going to look like. So we can't ask teachers to work on days that they weren't expected to work without extending their contracts. That's another question that I didn't even get into that we're asking for some official guidance on. In the event that teachers exceed their contracted days, we have to deal with the costs associated with that. So there's going to be some in and out with regards to what's happening during that time.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hagerty. I do want to make just one comment that much of the superintendent's final comments related to policy issues and policy questions. I want board members to know that I reached out to Ed Dunlap of the School Boards Association about the role of school boards and board members in this process, particularly as it relates to policy around this time and what role we might play as board members and as leaders of the 12 largest school districts. He appreciated the question, and his guidance right now was to stand down for the time being and allow our 115 superintendents across the state to continue to lead in this work. And that again, as the smoke sort of clears and we receive new guidance, particularly as it relates to the state General Assembly coming back into session, that sort of thing, there will be a role for us to play and those in the community to help advocate for the policies and the changes that were outlined in the superintendent's comments. So there will be an opportunity again for us to do that. But for right now, the idea is to continue to support our district, support our superintendents as they create, again, the infrastructure, both at an operational level, and then will be an opportunity to engage at an appropriate time to help create the policy infrastructure that's needed as well.
Thank you, sir. So I'll close my comments this evening just by saying again, I want to express my appreciation to the myriad of folks who are contributing to seeking solutions and the path forward through this pandemic, through the closure of schools. Our teachers are ready to go. They've been asking for guidance. Some of them are already gone, and that's great. And we want to support those who want additional information and need the resources. We want to help be the support to ensure that our students are getting what they need. We want to thank the families who have been providing grace and patience throughout this myriad of changes that have been occurring. We know that we will continue to have questions and not always answers right away, but the district is committed to ensuring that we continue to communicate, that we continue to respond. We ask folks who have questions to ask them so that we can acknowledge the question and the concern. We know that as we implement any kind of plan, program, or structure, that we're going to have the flexibility to reassess once it's out there and see what changes need to happen. That's something that we're doing already with the food security steps that we have in place. We've recognized that there are some places that we are not reaching, so we need to pivot to figure out how we can make sure that we're serving all of our students that way. And we're going to have to continue to have that flexibility as we move forward. So I want to thank again, as I said, all of those who have been a part of helping us work through this, our community partners, and the outpouring of folks who want to help and want to help provide solutions and whatever is needed. That's going to continue. The district is certainly in this for the long haul. We want to make sure that we are providing our kids and our teachers and our families what they need. We know now that this closure through May 15th, and if it lasts any longer or not, will impact the beginning of the school year next year. So we are already looking at what that impact looks like and how we can make sure that as we travel over the next 6 weeks and see how things are working with our students and our schools, our staff, our teachers, that we are ready to continue to adjust and make changes because the impacts, I believe, of COVID-19 will reach beyond just this particular school year. That's all I have for our update. We do have a second information item, and I believe that it is Bob Schneidmiller who is providing this. And so we will ask Bob to, he's unmuted his mic now, and then he can go.
Thank you, Superintendent Moore. Good morning, Chair Sutton, board members, and Superintendent Moore. Again, this is Bob Schneidmiller, Senior Director of Transportation. Today, we bring the proposed 2020-2021 school bell schedules to you for information only. Board Policy 3300 requires bell schedules for the subsequent school year to be approved by April 1st. All of you should have received a copy of the proposed 2021 bell schedule chart in your materials. I'd ask you to look at that if you would, so that I can go over that briefly with you. So you'll see on the chart there is only one bell schedule time highlighted in blue. That represents the only new school opening in school year 2021, and that is South Lakes Elementary School. We are recommending the standard elementary third tier schedule for South Lakes of 9:15 to 3:45. And in looking at the rest of the chart, what you can also see is that there are no bell changes recommended for the 2021 school year for existing schools. Therefore, everything will remain the same as in the current year, next year. Again, we bring this to you for information today only, and we'll bring recommendations back to you the first meeting in April for consideration. And I do want to point out that there is a consent item on today's agenda to waive policy 3300, requiring approval by April 1 to allow us to bring recommendations to the first board meeting in April for consideration of the board. And that is what I have for the 2021 bell schedule information item.
Thank you, Mr. Snodmiller. Mr. Hagerty.
Thank you, Mr. Sutton. You know, I've been really conflicted about whether or not even to bring this up.
Mr. Hagerty. Mr. Hagerty.
Yes.
If I can just
Can
stop
you
you
hear
for
me?
one second. If I could get a motion first then on this, and then I'll open this back up for discussion. But if I
Move
can,
that we accept this bell schedule. This is Roxy.
Second, Monica.
Excuse me, point of order.
Hold on. This
Point
is
of
John.
order. I believe
I'm
this was
sorry. I'm sorry. This is an information item. I'm sorry. This is not an action item. That's my apology.
Thank you.
So a motion is not needed. I apologize, Mr. Hagerty. Sorry for interrupting you. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Sutton. I was conflicted about whether or not even to bring this up, but I feel it has to be said. 1 year ago, when the bell schedule was discussed, this board requested information from staff about potential changes to the bell schedule. Understanding that this was not something that could be prepared in one meeting or even in time for the next meeting, but with the understanding that there would be a presentation about potential changes to the bell schedule that have been discussed by members of this board, particularly when middle schools start, when high schools start, when elementary schools start. And I know that it's a complex issue. And I know there are a lot of moving parts. And I know that right now, with everything going on in response to COVID-19, is not the time to be requesting additional information from staff as we're dealing with all of these other challenges. But it has to be said that we requested this 1 year ago. And we renewed that request at the end of calendar year 2019, when we still had not heard anything on this topic. So I don't think this should delay the adoption of this bell schedule. I understand that we need to have it. It should have, if not for the crisis, we would have had a bell schedule by April 1. I see that there are no changes proposed. I understand that, but I feel that that just needed to be said. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hagerty. I'll respond. I'll go to Ms. Kushner first, and I'll respond to that.
Thank you. And thanks to Mr. Hagerty, because I do agree with him that, and you shouldn't feel conflicted, because I think we've been talking about this for several years, and I would like to request from staff that in the coming year, we actually take this up in seriousness so we can look at early start times for some of our adolescents. Thanks.
So I want the board to know that we had a discussion around this 2 weeks ago. Prior to this, in our executive committee, we had a vigorous discussion, I'll say, about this very issue. I was the one that actually requested that we do a study, and this was a year ago, to take a
I think
look
Roxy
at.
was.
Okay. May have been myself, Roxy. Either way, the board requested that a study be done to look at similar sized districts and how they had handled the changes to bell schedules, looking at the related science and research around adolescent sleep schedules and things of that nature. Staff is beginning to look at that. Was working on the beginnings of a presentation to bring that to the board. We pulled that at that time because there were some details that needed to be answered. We did not want to bring the same questions that were being considered a year ago to the board, and so we pulled it. knew that we needed to move forward with this bell schedule and the addition of one school, the new school that's being added. So I would say Mr. Haggerty's staff is aware of our concerns around this. They are aware of the time frame that was put forward a year ago, and there have been conversations with the leadership and the superintendent around the expediency around getting that work done, so that we can address this this question of whether we can change our bell schedules and address that in earnest. So I just want to mention that. Superintendent Moore, do you want to add anything else to that?
Mr. Haggerty is correct, of course, that we owe the board a presentation and review on this. And we did discuss it. I think the first time we discussed it in executive was a little over a month ago. And then again, a couple of weeks ago. And it is forthcoming. And it'll be soon.
I see your hand raised again, or was that another question, or was that?
Thank you. I apologize. Thanks.
No problem.
Chair Sutton, do you see my hand raised?
I do. I see yours and Ms. Mahaffey's now. Go ahead.
Sorry. Okay. So yeah, I do want to say in defense, Mr. Haggerty, I understand that, and this is not a conversation from a year ago. This was actually a conversation we've been having since, a long time ago, long time. And I do, in defense of the administration, I do think that they were beginning to put some things together that they wanted to bring to us prior to this other situation we're in now. So, and I'm not sure I'm totally clear on what kind of studies the board wants them to look at, because there's a million studies out there about this. And we need to, as a board, be very clear what kind of information we want them to gather. Everybody does it a little differently, and we can go look in a million places at this and see different things. I think we've already established that there's sleep patterns that benefit the older kids. And I don't know if we have to restudy that, because that's been decided. So I want to be sure I want to be sure we're clear on what they're looking for, what kind of studies we're going to look for, but they have been working on this.
Thank you, Ms. Cash. Ms. Mahaffey.
Thank you so much. And thank you, Mr. Haggerty, for bringing this up. It was something that I had sent to staff back in January, and Superintendent Moore, thank you for sharing, and Mr. Sutton and Ms. Cash for sharing that this has been a conversation that has been ongoing this quarter, and that we will be expecting to see this soon. As far as studies go, Ms. Cash, I think we looked at specifically the recommendations of the American Association of Pediatrics to have adolescents sleep longer in the morning in order to boost academic performance, and just how their sleep schedules work generally. I think specifically what we were more asking from staff is, what would it look like? What would given the challenges of our 3-tier bus system and the constraints of not having enough bus drivers, and if anyone would like to apply, it's wcpss.net/busjobs. Within the constraints that we have in our system, how can we make that happen? And I think those were the places that we were asking staff to look. They have some amazing routing technology. We have great people working. They're creating these routes. And so just really seeing given the challenges, what realistically could we accomplish? Thank you.
That's correct. It was not a study. We were not asking staff, or my question was not asking staff about the science and the adolescent sleep patterns, but it was more about the implications on our system. For example, if we were to move or flatten our system from a 3-tier to a 1-tier bus system, what that would look like, what other districts who have engaged in a similar work, how they have approached the work, what cost implications were. Those were the questions that I was asking staff to take a look at in terms of a study, if you will. So
I just want to be clear that we weren't asking them to go out and look at another study about sleep.
no, I was very clear about that, and I think staff was aware and understood that. Ms. Johnson Hostler.
So actually, I had my hand raised with Ms. Mahaffey's. It was very similar, just reminding us that that was our request, is really logistically the feasibility of it. And I echo Mr. Haggerty and Ms. Kushner's concern. Is I think this is one of the things that we've been talking about for a while, and I feel like we have a number of board members who are ready to have this discussion, and I think it's important that we, unfortunate timing, but do remember that this is our commitment to the community, that we would actually do the work behind this and report back to them. And timing is everything, but unfortunately, I do think we have to still put this on the table and remind folks that it is still on our radar while it's a year later. And so thank you, Mr. Haggerty, for reminding the public that this has not fallen off of our radar.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson Hostler. All right, seeing no additional questions, I think that completes this item and also completes our information section of the agenda. Again, I want to thank the staff for the update on COVID as well as the bail schedule. And while there have been a lot of thank yous, I would be remiss if I didn't thank all the participants who have stuck with us during this portion of the agenda. It was quite extensive, but at the same time, one that was needed, and I think one that everyone was looking for additional information and answers to questions. We will continue to have this as a standing information item at our biweekly meetings, but with this being the first time, it was a little lengthy. I would imagine that as we move forward, this will be a little bit shorter, depending upon, again, on the information that we provide as an update. But again, thank you all for your patience and sticking through with us as we move through that part of the agenda. At this time, if I could entertain a motion to approve our items on the consent agenda.
Motion to approve the consent agenda.
Second.
Got a motion from Ms. Mahaffey and a second from Mr. Fletcher to approve our consent agenda items. There's no discussion. All those in favor show by sign of aye.
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 Any opposed, nay. Ayes have it. Our consent agenda is approved. Moving now to our action portion of the agenda. We've got several policies. To review. The first is policy 4240 and policy 7312. This is child abuse and related threats to child safety. And Mr. Paul Coe will be bringing that forward.
Good evening, Chair Sutton, board members, Superintendent Moore. I'm bringing let's see, 4240, 7312 for first reading. And just in terms of the general layout of this, actually, before I get there, this was taken to policy committee, I believe, in February, and we took some of the inputs and feedback and updated. But to give you the general layout, we've shifted the layout to not be in just one paragraph form, but starts with a preamble, has sections A through F with specifics outlined. So those are the updates we've made to the policy, and we've made some additional, so I'll start there and see if there's any questions.
In order to start conversation for questions, I'll make a motion to approve policy,
Second.
first reading.
I got a motion and from Ms. Mahaffey and a second from Mr. Hegarty to approve this policy on first reading. Any discussion?
Yes, Mr. Sutton. This is Ms. Johnson Hostler. And again, I'd like to thank Mr. Coe and his entire team for all of the work on this and the ongoing nature of pulling together a very diverse team in our district to look at ways to really fully and efficiently implement this. And I will say, as someone who spends my day job, now night job, doing this as we figure out how to address these issues, especially during this pandemic, that without a shadow of a doubt, we have a team committed to the safety and well-being of our students. And I do believe the ways that they're working towards ensuring that all of our district is informed and aware of how to address it goes without saying. They are turning over every stone and thinking completely outside of the box in ways to implement this. And I appreciate the work that you all are putting into this, Mr. Coe, and the full team that's engaged. And I'd like to say the beauty is this is the first place that I've seen us really adequately drill down on what this looks like for both sides of the house, both academics and operational. So thanks for the leadership and the team working on this.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson Hostler. Ms. Kushner.
Thank you. And I wanted to extend thanks to Ms. Johnson Hostler for her work in supporting the staff in doing their best work on this. And as I think Mr. Coe alluded to, this did come through the policy committee and driven by changes both in federal and state regulations. So I appreciate the work to further clarify and improve the policy. And my one question, Mr. Coe, is around the training timeline. A lot of the training that was already set up for complying with Senate Bill 199 was going to be online. So I'm assuming, since it was designed to be online, that training is going to go forward and that we're on track to implement the policy in our schools.
Yeah, so I appreciate the question, Ms. Kushner. So the way we've looked at it is that there are specific foundational pieces that we could give online, but it's also important to, and like given this context, how we approach it might change, but having also in-person interfacing so that the guidance and the questions that this topic could raise in training staff. We were working towards a hybrid, but we will have, we already have a foundational training through some slides that we've developed that we could put virtually online as the COVID-19 situation evolves.
Thank you.
All right. Ms. Mahaffey, did you have a question, or was that your hand from request to make a motion?
That was from requesting to make the motion. I will take it down. Thank you.
Okay.
Yes, thank you. So sort of an extension of my question before, thinking about the online privacy, supportive of the work that we've done in the policy, but I encourage us, as we think about child safety, to be really cognizant of what we see in online chats and whatnot. That policy did not have as much of an online focus as we need to be aware of going forward. So I just put out that information just to encourage us to keep an eye out for aspects of child safety, even in the online format.
Yes, sir.
All right. Seeing no further discussion, I've got a motion and a second to approve Board Policy 4240 and 7312, child abuse and related threats to child safety on first reading. All of those in favor show by sign of aye.
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 Any opposed, nay? Ayes have it. Board Policy 4240 and 7312 is approved on first reading. We now move to Board Policy 7241, drug and alcohol testing of commercial motor vehicle operators. That is being presented by Dr. AJ Matillo.
Greetings again. This is AJ. Chair Sutton, members of the board. I'm here to present to you the first reading of policy 7241, drug and alcohol testing of commercial motor vehicle operators. Policy 7241 is being presented as part of the policy migration project. Once approved, it will replace current policy 2306, 3006/4006. The policy was reviewed at the February 10th Superintendent's Leadership Team meeting and the February 25th Policy Committee meeting. As requested and approved by Policy Committee on February 25th, you will find that this policy today has additional language in section B4, just defining the number of specific hours. Also in section C regarding CBD use and testing, we've clarified that language, as well as some languages in D2, just distinguishing a full query versus a limited query. I'm requesting tonight the board's approval on first reading of policy 7241, drug and alcohol testing of commercial motor vehicle operators.
Thank you, Dr. Matillo. Ms. Kushner.
Thank you, Chair Sutton. I wanted to make a motion to approve Board Policy 7241 on first reading. And wanted to just appreciate the staff for providing this clarifications just through also the migration, as well as to comply with new federal guidelines. Thank our colleague, Chris Haggerty, for bringing that further clarification for under C for regarding CBD. I think we have better language that can help guide staff. Thank you.
Got a motion from Ms. Kushner and a second from Ms. Mahaffey. Board Policy 7241 to approve Policy 7241 on its first reading. No further discussion. Are those in favor?
Oh, Mr. Sutton, I've got my hand up.
I'm sorry.
Again, I just want to excuse me for a minute. Again, I just want to reiterate the point made by Ms. Kushner that there was significant look at this policy, and I really appreciate staff and our board attorney really giving it a thorough legal vetting. I think North Carolina has some unusual employment law practices, and I thought it was important to get this policy exactly right. And I think they did an excellent job of conforming our policy to state law, and I really want to commend them for that.
Thank you, Mr. Haggerty. All right, now seeing no further discussion, I've got a motion and a second, again for Policy 7241 for approval on first reading. All those in favor show by sign of aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, nay. Ayes have it. Board Policy 7241 is approved on its first reading.
Thank you all. Appreciate it.
Thank you, sir. We have a board policy, an additional board policy that we need to look at, and this is on COVID-19 response and our board meetings. Given the challenges and risks associated with the coronavirus, the Wake County Board of Education will continue to conduct meetings in order to make informed decisions in the best interest of students, staff, and the public, while complying with legal obligations and honoring its commitment to serve our school district and community in a responsible, sound manner. The board will continue to give our public access to board meetings and opportunities to participate in board meetings in line with legal requirements. To facilitate continued meetings and avoid large gatherings of people as feasible, the board temporarily waives any requirements in policy that limit board members from participating in board meetings remotely, that barriers on electronic board meetings, and that require meetings beyond those required by law, with the understanding that the board will continue to conduct required meetings and provide the public access to its meetings and avenues for public comments at regular meetings. specifically and without limiting the superintendent's temporary authority to waive additional policies or provisions of policies that are not required by law, the board waives the following. The provisions of policy 2302, which is remote participation in board meetings, that place any limitations on board members' ability to participate remotely in all aspects of board meetings. The provisions of policy 2300, board meetings. These require meetings beyond those required by law, with the understanding that the superintendent and board chair will continue to schedule board meetings as appropriate and needed to enable the board to continue to provide effective leadership and to make informed decisions. And the provisions of policy 2310, public participation at board meetings, that may place any restrictions on members of the public from providing public comment through remote access to regular meetings to the extent feasible and otherwise consistent with this policy. Temporary waivers of these policies will remain in effect until the board determines that the waivers are no longer necessary to address the extraordinary challenges presented by the coronavirus. The board will provide the public with access to any board meetings conducted through electronic means and otherwise will continue to keep the public informed of its efforts to uphold safety and educate students responding to the coronavirus. There are no fiscal implications to this policy at this time, so I now entertain a motion of waiver of the said policy.
I move to waiver this policy.
Second.
I've got a motion and a second, a motion from Ms. Cash and a second from Ms. Johnson-Hostler to waive the provisions of policy 2302, policy 2300, and policy 2310. Is there any discussion? Ms. Mahaffey.
Yes, I had a question on number 3. If we could get just a little bit of an expansion on what it's talking about regarding our public and their participation in board meetings and what that looks like.
This is Jonathan. That language is in there just out of an abundance of caution to make it clear that a member of the public does not have to be physically present when the board's having remote meetings or electronic meetings to be able to submit comments, as was done tonight. So it was just really out of an abundance of caution on that one.
Thank you. That's the clarification I was seeking to make sure that we were still able to receive comments from the public, but wanted to make sure that that's what we were speaking to.
Thank you, Ms. Mahaffey, and thank you for the clarification, Mr. Bloomberg. I do also want to mention at this time that we had some discussion, and it was my thinking that we would suspend meetings such as BAC meetings and committee meetings. Given that we've used this virtual medium twice now with our closed session on yesterday and the public meeting today, and it seems to be working well, I did want to get some or any thoughts and consideration around the board wanting to continue committee meetings using this medium, or for now, do we want to suspend, continue in terms of suspending? We've canceled a number of committee meetings up to this date as we get accustomed to using this new medium. Any thoughts or discussion around that? Ms. Scott?
I would hope that as we become more familiar with using the online virtual meetings, that would allow us to hear from staff on various items that they've been working on for quite some time in terms of committee meetings. So I know there's a lot of information that we're still going to, that has already been processed that might even be, just waiting to be presented to us and presented to the public as well. And I would hope that we could actively move towards that. I think regarding Board Advisory Council, I would love to still be able to have that opportunity, but maybe that's just, I'm just sad because my BAC chair, her daughter is a senior, so we'll be losing her after many years of service. But I do hope that we can continue to try to add these meetings in virtually.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Kushner.
Thank you. And I wanted to add just a query about the joint meeting we had scheduled with our commissioners, which I believe is in a week or so, because there were some important issues that we had to discuss with our colleagues on the commission. And I don't know if we could manage to do that remotely, but want to add that to the list of meetings to consider to have virtually.
So for right now, we have not decided to cancel that meeting as of yet. Of course, we are mindful of where we are and just maintaining social distancing concerns. So we're just looking at the challenges logistically around having that meeting. Obviously, we think we can do it virtually, and we're just thinking about the agenda. There has been some discussion around continuing the agenda around the CIP plans, but also having a portion on the agenda might talk jointly about the challenges presented by COVID-19 and how both boards have been working together as partners around the response to that. So we're considering that, and I'm certain that within the next day or two, there will be a decision made in communication with the superintendent, county manager, how we might move forward with that.
Thank you, Mr. Sutton. That's good news to hear. Appreciate it.
Martin.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to reaffirm my support that I'm good to go ahead with committee meetings virtually, and similarly with the BAC. I have not canceled my BAC and do hope to be able to hold it online. I can hold it through Zoom, or I'm assuming that we'll be able to have staff support to do the WebEx, but I would encourage us to continue those, because I do believe that there needs to be an opportunity for the personal give and take that we have at the BAC meetings. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Martin. Ms. Cash?
Yeah, first of all, I'm very much in agreement of that we should do a joint meeting with the county commissioners. I think I've mentioned that, the fact that this is a good time for us to continue to be strong together. So if we can work that out, that's great. I do hope that we can do some committee meetings. I do think there's some things in front of us, whether there be some budget items, and I don't know what, but I know there must be some business to be done. So, and I guess I'll need help with doing a back, so I'll probably need to talk to Marlo about that. But I agree with the BAC meetings. That's probably a really good idea to continue those too. Just my opinion.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Cash. Ms. Mahaffey, did you have another comment?
Just want to share my support in continuing with committee meetings. I know in addition to the work that staff is doing regarding COVID response, that was unexpected. We have a budget that we have to start putting together, and that does not stop. And we have to start our prep for next school year with the code of conduct, with policy. And so I am in full support of continuing committee meetings using this platform. Thank you.
Well, thank you for those comments. That does help inform our practice moving forward. The cancellations that we made within the last week or two really were prior to having this infrastructure in place. And so now that we have that gives us some additional options and opportunities. So as we all well know, is evolving, and as we continue to evolve and respond, we'll be able to do more. With that being said,
Mr. Sutton,
yes.
can I quickly add, while I strongly support going forward with the committees, I also want to be sensitive to staff who's got a lot on their plate right now. And budget stuff in particular, we really need to work on. I'm thinking things particularly like student achievement, that may be times to update us on COVID-19 work. But I just wanted to make sure that we're also very responsive to staff, and we're not right now putting a lot of additional burden on presentations to us when there's other work that needs to be done. So just a sensitivity to staff in forming agenda and what we do. Thank you.
No, I think that's well said, and I think at the end of the day, what we'll do is take these things and all other things that are going on at the time, and make a decision as we arrive at each meeting, and talk with the committee chairs, superintendent and leadership, and sort of make determinations on a case-by-case basis. The BAC meetings, those are yours. That's for you, each board member and your BAC chair, to determine and make a call in terms of time and location in terms of being virtual. So we'll let you all make those calls, and any support that board and staff can provide to you, we're here to do, but we'll rely on you all to make those calls with regard to your BAC meetings. So again, I've got a motion and a second on COVID-19 response and waiver of, again, the said policies before. With that, and I see no more discussion, so I'll with the motion and a second, all those in favor show by sign of aye.
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 Any opposed, nay? Ayes have it. Policies 2302, policies 2300, and policies 2310 have been waived with that approval, with that vote. All right, well, that brings us to nearing the end of our agenda. We had closed session prior to this meeting, so we do have some HR administrative appointments to approve. Can I entertain a motion to approve the HR appointments first?
I move approval of the human resource recommendations for administrative appointments and recommendations for employment.
Second.
Got a motion from Ms. Kushner and a second from Ms. Johnson-Hostler to approve the HR recommendations brought forward by staff and the superintendent. All those in favor show by sign of aye.
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 Any opposed, nay? Ayes have it. HR appointments are approved. We also had a couple of offers to purchase land. Is Parker available for those motions? Or do you have those, Mr. Bloomberg?
Yes, let me just go ahead, and really the agenda item speaks for itself, so I'll just go ahead and read that. That the staff is requesting that the board approve the terms and conditions for an offer to purchase and contract with Gregory W. Hobby and spouse Julie K. Hobby to acquire a parcel of land containing 31.861 acres. The property is located at 612 Rex Road, Holly Springs. I think that's adequate.
Okay.
Second, I move approval.
I'm sorry.
Mr. Sutton, I'd move approval of the purchase of that property. The correct address is 6125 Rex Road.
Second.
All right, that's a motion to approve from Mr. Fletcher and a second from Ms. Mahaffey to approve the purchase of the land at 6125 Rex Road in Holly Springs from George Hobby and spouse Julie K. Hobby. All those in favor show by sign of aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, nay? Ayes have it. That motion to purchase is approved.
If there's no other action, sir, I move that we adjourn.
I want to be certain there were the two condemnations, small condemnations. Did they also need approval?
No.
They do not, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, all right, just wanted to be certain.
I second that motion to adjourn.
All right, I got a motion from Ms. Kushner and a second from Ms. Cash to adjourn tonight's meeting. Any discussion? I would assume that there is none.
Just thanks to everybody. Sincerely.
Yes.
Again, thank you to all for participating. We appreciate your hanging in with us, and we'll continue to press forward. With that, motion and a second to adjourn. All those in favor show by sign of aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, nay? Ayes have it. We stand adjourned with this first virtual meeting. Again, thank you all so much.
Wait, I gotta shut the recording.